This is Walk-Ins Welcome with Bridget Phetasy. I'm Bridget Phetasy, and you are welcome. You know the drill. Please subscribe, rate, comment, share, reach out, tell your friends, send smoke signals, whatever. We love your feedback and we want to hear from you. This episode of Walk-Ins Welcome has two sponsors, Green Chef and Third Love. Green Chef is a USDA certified organic company that makes eating well easy and affordable with plans to fit every kind of lifestyle. For $50 off your first box of Green Chef, go to greenchef.us/walkin. That's greenchef.us/walkin for $50 off your first box. Third Love knows there's a perfect bra for everyone, so right now they're offering my listeners 15% off your first order. Go to thirdlove.com/walkin now to find your perfect fitting bra and get 15% off your first purchase. That's thirdlove.com/walkin for 15% off today. People are always asking me, who are you and how did you get here? So the occasional Walk-Ins Welcome episode is going to answer some of those questions in a segment I like to call Story Hour with Bridget Phetasy. Some names have been bleeped to protect the innocent.
All right. It's time for another Story Hour with Bridget Phetasy.
That's right, folks. Buckle up, because I'm going to tell the story of how I got sober.
Yeah, we're covering your addiction, sobriety.
I thought because last week I did a tweet, a lot of people reach out to me and they're like, I have 30 days, because I'm always so open about being sober on Twitter. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of people reach out and they'll share or they'll DM me like, I have 5 months or whatever. And like 3 people did it yesterday. So I was inspired to tweet just that people had been reaching out, and then everyone started posting how long. I have no idea how many sober people were following me, and it was so inspiring. You know, Twitter's been such a dumpster fire, and it was just this light, positive thing. But then, of course, come all the questions.
Right.
And it's like, how long have you been sober? How did you get sober? How did you do it?
Right.
So I thought it would be a good chance to tell that story, and I will treat it a little bit like an AA share or a 12-step share. Generally, I wouldn't go for an hour, but I probably could.
You can always, yeah.
Well, no, I mean, I could go for an hour. It's just you generally don't get unless you're like on the circuit doing an hour-long speech. I'm not pitch. I'm not doing an hour, but my story is easily an hour. Or you'll do like 40 minutes and then do questions. Mm-hmm. But I want you to jump in and just ask questions as we go along.
Yeah. Well, let's start with, like, can you remember your first experience with alcohol or drugs, or like the first time you ever got high or drunk?
Yeah, I think my first drug of choice was sugar. Oh. I honestly think that I don't know if it's genetics or whatever it is, a disease. I always have a bit of a hard time with that concept still. My first sponsor said, think of it like an allergy. It's like when I have a negative reaction but I just have an addictive personality. Right. So I feel like that's something genetic, because you are my cousin and you can say, I'm going to have one beer. Yeah. And you will have one beer. Yeah. And I would say, I'm going to have one beer, and everyone would roll their eyes. And I would say, yeah, I'm going to be the sober cab, and everyone would laugh. Yeah. Because that never happened. No. Once I started drinking, it was like Pringles. Once you pop, I couldn't stop. But, looking back, I treated sugar the same way I treated drugs. Mm-hmm. And when I was a kid, we used to eat those little gummy, they weren't gummy bears. They were like the fruit snacks that came in the little bags. And I hoarded mine. My siblings, I'm the oldest of 5, they would all eat theirs right away, and I kept mine in like a big bag, and then someone stole my bag, rightfully so. I mean, I was being like an obnoxious hoarder. Yeah. And so I had this huge bag and I was saving it, and they stole it, and I think they all divvied it up and ate it amongst themselves. Right. And I lost it. Like, couldn't get over it. Still remember it to this day. We were going up to this cabin we used to go to in Minnesota. I was probably like 8 or 9. I mean, I was young. It was like in second grade, first or second grade. And I also remember having really junky behavior around candy and like Kool-Aid. My parents would give me Kool-Aid and say, go have a Kool-Aid stand. And I would drink all the Kool-Aid and get high and be running around like a maniac with blue lips and tell my parents that someone knocked over my Kool-Aid and that they spilled it and it was all gone.
Wow.
I was lying and using.
Right.
And then on my 10th birthday, my godfather gave me 2 pounds of gummy bears, and learning from my siblings stealing all of my fruit snacks earlier, I was still traumatized, clearly, because I locked myself in my dad's office that was above the garage. I ate all 2 pounds of the gummy bears and spent my entire birthday throwing up. And then they all got to eat my cake.
Yeah, that's an amazing story.
It's addict behavior, though.
Right. So obviously very young, but I think for listeners too, and maybe in a different story hour we'll cover like a little bit more of your childhood. But you were like a straight A student.
Oh yeah,
I
was a good
straight
kid.
and narrow. You were like
I was a parent's wet dream.
Right. You were like going to an Ivy League school.
That was my dream. Yeah. And I remember going to Dare and being like, I'm never going to be an idiot that does drugs.
Right.
I just thought it was so stupid. I didn't understand why anyone would do that. And I have letters when I moved from Connecticut to Minnesota, which is, we'll do another story hour where we cover my moving.
Right.
But I moved from Connecticut to Minnesota when I was at the end of 7th grade. And so my friends and I would write letters, and because it was pre-internet, and these things called letters.
Yes, you'd write them out longhand.
You write them on paper and send them snail mail.
Penmanship mattered.
And my friend told me that she had started, tried smoking weed or something, or she was thinking about it. And I was like, I would never do that. Like, so morally righteous, and I would never do such a thing. I can't believe it. And like a year later, my first time drinking, I blacked out. I was with a bunch of older kids.
How old were you? What grade?
It was
were you?
right when my parents probably the summer between. When did my parents separate? It was the summer between 6th and 7th grade, I think.
Wow.
And I was young, like 12.
You always hung out with older kids, though.
Yeah. And it was 3 couples and me, and we all went out to this island that was off the coast of Connecticut, just a small little one, like Sandy Point or something. And they left me with the cooler of beer, and they all went to like go make out on the island. And they said, guard the beer. And I just sat there and drank by the fire by myself. And I drank maybe 6 or 8 beers.
Good Lord.
My first time, and I was drunk, blacked out, and don't remember anything. Don't remember really getting home. They came back. I do know that they were like, "Oh crap, we got this like young girl hammered," and they were kind of all drunk too. And that was kind of that. Off to the races. I loved it. I felt cool. I was with the older kids and more, but it wasn't even that I felt cool. I drank to fit in so much that I moved every year and a half.
Right.
So it wasn't like I cared about, I cared about being cool and popular and whatever, but I kind of moved beyond that after moving so many times and going to 3 8th grades and 2 freshman years kind of destroyed me.
Right.
And I stopped caring and just used drinking because I knew that at every school there would be people who partied.
Right.
So it wasn't like I cared about being cool. I just knew it was an easy way into making friends.
Right.
Without ever having to let people see me.
And I remember you talking about this before where you were like, you learned to be a human chameleon. Like you learned to become kind of whatever role you needed to be in whatever new school you were in.
And I always drank. I think the first time I ever tried booze was in the basement at our uncle's. And it was like a New Year's Eve party and somebody had vodka and I drank some vodka. That was like the first time I ever had booze. And I didn't hate it. And then when I got drunk that first time, I wanted oblivion. I always drank for oblivion. That was always what I wanted. That's why I don't understand moderation or like 2 drinks sounds like hell to me. It doesn't. I never wanted to drink normally.
Right.
I might have tried to behave later once after rehab and all the things that we'll get to, but my original desire all through junior high and high school was just oblivion. And when I started smoking, which was very shortly after I started drinking, I smoked a joint with a bunch of older kids on the way to the head shop that they were going to because they needed to get some supplies. And I got high, instantly fell in love with it. And we can talk about weed too, because I feel like they're all different addictions, but weed is insidious. And my true love, I loved it instantly. Bought a pipe that we called Bubbles. And and because it looked like those old school, those things used to blow bubbles out of.
Oh, yeah, like the little pipes.
But it was like a crack pipe, basically. But it was blue and gold. I remember it. And it ended up being my school colors at one of the new schools I went to, and everyone loved it. It was kind of like Pinchy.
Right.
And
we'll get to Pinchy.
We'll get to Pinchy. Pinchy had a life of her own. So instantly off to the races with that too. It was like I got stoned, I bought paraphernalia, and I was off and running. And with drinking, I don't think I started drinking and was like drinking all the time. It just wasn't that easy to come by. But I drank as often as I could. And then when we moved from Connecticut to Minnesota, and then I was in
high school,
8th grade.
Okay.
So I went to 3 8th grades.
Right.
And the first one was like I was like the only white girl. It was a private school, but it was in the hood in Minneapolis. And I was a chameleon. So I became like I guess back in the day they called them, I don't even know if you can say this anymore, but it was like a wigger.
That's right. I forgot about that term. I don't know. I'm going to have to look that up before we publish this podcast and see if it's
so bad that you have to like step on. I mean, that was what it was called then. I'm not calling it now. I don't know what the term is.
Right. But that's what you were.
That's what everyone called me.
Yeah.
That's what, and I started dating this guy that was like, we were hanging out at the Y, and it was problematic. I started getting in with the wrong crowds and wearing big hoop earrings, and I got my hair permed, and I was just a shit show. So my parents pulled me out of that school in like 2 months, I think it was like 4 months in.
Well, so at this point though, your parents were divorced, and was your mom remarried?
Yeah, my mom.
Okay, well, your mom and stepdad.
Yeah, my mom and stepdad got together when my mom and dad got separated. They both got into the relationships that they're still in today.
Right.
But that was when they were separated. And then like less than a week after the divorce was final, my mom got remarried.
Right.
Which was a year later.
Right.
And then we basically moved. We left after they got married. So that summer was very busy. My mom, she got divorced, remarried, and then we moved.
Right.
And to Minnesota, far away from all of our family and everything we knew. And that's when the drinking, when the cat's away, the mice will play. So it started in 7th grade. I was drinking a lot too, because I was just like running with the older kids and
right. Because your parents kind of stopped.
I started smoking in 7th grade.
They were going through their own shit, so they kind of stopped paying attention. I guess.
They stopped being parents. That's when I stopped having parents. Was when I was 12.
Right.
And they did the best they could, I guess, but they were really just involved in their own lives and dramas. Right. And my mom married somebody who needed a lot of attention. And so I just kind of was off and running and drinking and playing spin the bottle. And
right. So they pulled you out of that school. Then what happened?
And then we moved to Minnesota. I went to 8th grade. I got pulled out of that school. And then I went to Benilde, where I was so out, like it was kind of all these rich kids in Minnesota. And they were so mean to me. These girls were so cruel to me. I started getting migraines. I had to get an MRI because they thought that I was, that I had like a brain tumor, but it was stress headaches.
Wow.
And oh God, that time was rough. I like blocked that out of my mind, but I did find the kids who drank, and I remember smoking cigarettes a lot and Benilde at parties. Like I have such a vivid memory of drinking a beer in a hot tub and smoking a cigarette and feeling like the only person in the world. And I think that was around the time my So-Called Life was on. And that show like saved my life. And then I went to this school called Holy Angels and proceeded to get in so much trouble. My best friend's name was Bridget, and we were like trouble on two wheels. I didn't have a car, so I rollerbladed everywhere, like around all the lakes in downtown Minneapolis.
Oh my God.
Yeah, because nobody would drive me anywhere, so I'd rollerblade like 20 miles to go to a party. It was nuts.
Oh my God.
And I was like, I couldn't drive. I was 15.
Lucky you aren't dead.
I almost did get kidnapped
so
one day. These guys drove into the cul-de-sac, and two of them started chasing me, and two of them opened the trunk, and I rollerbladed into traffic. I just rollerbladed into the street.
God.
I know. It was terrifying, actually. But we started smoking so much weed, and
obviously you've been through a lot, or were going through a lot, so no wonder you were seeking oblivion too.
Yeah, that was a dark time in our family. Maybe some of the darkest, which is saying a lot. But the home life was insane at that point. Or it was the beginning of insane. And weed was like my coping mechanism from day one. I could not look any of it in the face. And so I just smoked myself. My whole thing was always like smoke myself retarded. I know you can't use that word. I'm sorry, but that's what we said.
Right. But I think having talked to you about it later, you were like, it also saved your life at that point because it was your way of numbing.
I do think looking back, I probably would have killed myself as like a teenager, I think. I think I would have been, I was always a deep little soul. I think I was always a deep thinker, just even as a little kid. And I couldn't, I was watching my mom really struggle and my siblings, and feeling like powerless and helpless, and oblivion was the only way out, really, from my perspective. So I was already really depressed. I remember sitting down in my room, it was in the basement, and listening to Wish You Were Here on repeat. For some reason, I just listened to that. Even now when I hear that song, the Pink Floyd song, it just like I can be in that basement. And I was just stoned all the time, and I was totally one of those like proud stoners. I feel like the way I was at that age is the way the world is now about marijuana. They're like, look at us, we're smoking. Smoking is so cool.
Yeah.
Like where you're advertising
now that it's legal these days.
But I was like wearing the like Rasta shirts, and that was when that Snoop Dogg album came out that everyone knew by heart. And it was the year that oh my God, see, I'm such a stoner. My favorite movie ever.
What, Harold and Maude?
No. That is my favorite movie ever, but the stoner movie.
Dazed and Confused?
Yeah, thank you. Dazed and Confused came out, and we knew that by heart. And yeah, that was the year that my smoking really just became daily. Right. I just became a daily smoker.
Right.
And then my parents promised that if I got good grades that I could stay at this school, and I liked it. And then they lied. And I got good grades, and then they moved to the suburbs, and I had to go to a school in the suburbs.
This was your freshman year?
No, this was my sophomore year.
Oh, so you went to two schools in your sophomore year too?
No, I went to two schools in my freshman year, 3 in my 8th grade.
And then
the first one in my 8th grade was Visitation, which I was at for 3 days. It was a school that I was at where my best friend was when I was in kindergarten through 2nd grade. It was like a private Catholic school. Then we moved away. So I guess I'm going to have to give people this overview. We moved back to Connecticut and then moved back to Minnesota. But that was just a freak chance that my stepdad had a house in Minnesota. Right. And then they felt bad and wanted me to go to this school, but it was such a huge commute and on the other side of town that they're like, no, this isn't going to work after like 3 days. So then they put me in St. Anne, St. Margaret Mary.
And that's the one you wanted to stay in?
No, that was the one where I became like, I was becoming like,
oh, okay,
a hood rat, essentially.
No, okay. I'm talking about your freshman year. So you...
Oh, freshman year, I spent half of that. So then I ended my 8th grade year at Benilde and started my 9th grade year at Benilde.
And that's the one they promised you could stay at?
No. Oh. Then Holy Angels I went to halfway through my 8th grade year at my freshman year.
Why did you switch then?
Because I was getting migraines and I was tortured. Tortured and bullied and miserable. And so they put me in this other school. And meanwhile, my siblings were all just in public school. I don't know why I didn't just go to public school. But I think because I was like this straight A student, they were trying. And the public schools were good for up to where my younger siblings were.
Right.
And they weren't good for my age.
Right. So then the one you ended your freshman year in, that was the one you wanted to stay in. Mm-hmm. And they said you could, but then you guys moved again.
Yeah, and I was devastated. And then we went to Orono. Mm-hmm. And I just partied for the rest of my high school.
Right.
And it escalated. But it never escalated to the point that I was doing hard drugs in high school. At least, and I shroomed and did some psychedelics and whatever. But then I got drugged and raped after my senior year.
Right.
And that was when then I went to college in Minnesota, which was a huge mistake. I should have not. I was drinking, blacking out, I missed a third of my junior year of high school.
Right.
Just to party. And I went to my senior graduation wasted. We almost missed it. We were out on the lake drinking. It was like I was always partying and always going to live music, and it just became everything. And I would smoke before I went to school, and I would leave school and smoke weed and come back. And I started working in a restaurant really young.
That's right.
And then that's when my real fixation with booze, I got even more enamored with the lifestyle.
Yeah.
I just saw, now I look at it and it's such a funny perspective. But at the time I was like, they sit after the bar and drink, like after work and drink.
The waiters and waitresses.
Yeah. And I was a busser and I just so badly wanted to be that. Mm-hmm. And then I ended up going to college, and I was in the dorm for a minute and I hated that. And then I got a job and my own place, but still was going to college. Mm-hmm. Then I started doing hard drugs. Like after it just escalated. It was like I tried meth and I was going to raves for a while. And then it's funny when I think of how quickly once I started doing hard drugs, I bottomed out. It was like a year.
Yeah.
It was not. I just rock bottomed by the end of my...
Well, you were also, it's like you were spiraling after being drugged and raped.
Well, yeah. And I think the trajectory was, it was basically a long, slow decline with a rapid ending rock bottom one, we'll call it.
Right.
And that was 1 year. Essentially, I got drugged and raped, started doing tons of hard drugs, got kicked out of college, started using heroin, gave everything up, lost my job, lost my apartment, lost everything. It was so quick. Everything. Mm-hmm. I lost everything. When I think about it, I lost everything in a year.
Did you move to LA at one point during that time?
No, I came to LA with my boyfriend who I started doing drugs with because he had a screening of a movie. And that was like my rock bottom was out here. It was I could write a fucking screenplay about that week.
It was pouring rain and you were walking?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It was after the screening and my boyfriend was flirting with some girl and I left it was at Bar Marmont and I left Chateau Marmont and I was walking back to we were at the Best Western on Sunset, which you can see from the Comedy Store. Whenever I'm on the Comedy Store patio, I'm like, I almost died in that building over there because I almost OD'd and we were like running and we had done tons of blow and we were running down the stairs and I just collapsed because I think I had like a mini heart attack or something. God. And I was so petrified. My boyfriend was screaming at you. Mind you, I weighed 89 pounds at this point. I mean, this was after Mame died too.
Right.
So
our grandmother
died in the midst of all of this. It was right before I went out.
Right.
Right before I went out to LA. It was in April. And then we were out there in May. And so I was a shit show. I mean, I gave the eulogy at my grandmother's funeral on heroin, unbeknownst to anyone.
No,
really.
I had no idea. Well, I mean,
nobody would know. Yeah, knew. And
one of our cousins knew.
Yeah, because she was smart. And we ended up. I was walking home. I mean, I do believe I have so many guardian angels.
Right.
There have been so many times where I've been blacked out or in some state where someone just shows up and picks me up and brings me back to where I should be.
Yeah. So what happened? So you were walking home.
I was walking in the pouring rain. I didn't have anything. I had our hotel key. That was it. I didn't even have a jacket. And this cab driver pulled over and was like, "You need a ride?" And I said, "I don't have any money." And he's like, "I don't care. Just get in. I'll drive you wherever." And I was only going down Sunset.
Right.
But he gave me a ride back to the hotel and I had bad night. We got into a huge fight. I mean, that week is so many shameful, horrible memories of just debauchery and demoralization and things I don't even remember. And a director I could probably Me Too who still hasn't been Me Too'd, which is shocking. And so many bad things.
Was that where you had that moment where you were like in the bathroom?
No, that was when I came home. Oh, okay. So my aunt tried to go get me in the valley in the like crack hotel den that we were in. And it was like a hotel crack den. It was disgusting. And she, if you know my aunt, like getting her to the valley. Yeah. And she had me in the car. And then my mom was on the phone and started yelling at me. And I got out of the car and went back to my boyfriend. And I was like, wow, F you and F this and all the stuff. And then we both had to his parents were like, "Get your asses on that plane and get home." Because we were just out of control. On the way out to LA, this is a crazy story. My boyfriend had a suitcase full of drugs, like all kinds of drugs. And he was a like bit of a child star. So he was used to kind of just getting, they're used to doing whatever they want. Right. And he started acting out on the plane and pretending he didn't know me. And then he was stealing things, but then he started stealing the liquor from the little liquor from the things. And it was just, and I was like, "Oh, his friend died. I'm sorry." And they were like not having it. This was pre 9/11, mind you.
Yeah.
And they called the cops and the cops were waiting for us in LA when we landed.
God, what an idiot.
Yeah. And so we had this suitcase full of drugs and we're landing in LA to the cops. I mean, we were out of our minds on drugs. So I'm not surprised. But when you think about how unruly he must have been in order to have the police meet us.
How did you get out of that?
I have no idea. So I do know. Because Minnesota is like land of 10,000 treatment centers. There was this kid who was coming back to LA from treatment. And my boyfriend at the time was like, "Hey, can you take this suitcase off the plane with you and meet us in baggage claim?"
Oh my God.
And the kid did it.
Oh my God.
I mean, imagine that temptation. You are like fresh out of rehab and someone gives you a suitcase full of drugs.
Jesus.
And it's like, "Hey, can you hold this for us and meet us in baggage claim?" And he did. I couldn't believe it.
Okay, so wait.
So we get off of the plane and there's these two huge burly cops and they're like, "What are you doing with this fucking loser?" Like they were so mad that I was with this scrawny little loser and they were just, I was like, I don't know. And it should have been a warning sign for that whole, I mean, the thing, trip. Yeah, I did things that were unsavory. It's just ridiculous.
Okay, so getting back to, so your parents and his parents were like, "Get on the plane." back to Minnesota after this horrible trip in LA.
Yeah. And I was in the cab on the way to LAX with him, and we were smoking crack in the cab, and the cab driver was like, "Stop smoking crack in my cab."
My God.
And I mean, there were things like we were so high on blow, we got paranoid delusions and thought that a DEA was chasing us. So, and he had destroyed multiple hotel rooms, and I had to like hide drugs.
Oh my God.
And we like sped over the canyons like we were being chased. And I called my aunt and uncle, and I was like, there are helicopters everywhere, they're chasing. I mean, it was not like crazy.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Okay, so you got on the plane though. Did you make it to the plane?
Yeah, we made it to the plane, and I remember throwing the crack pipe out the cab window and being like, I can't do this anymore. Like, I was just so rock bottom. It was just so bad. And I had lost everything at that point, really. I had never lost a job. And mind you, I was 19, so it's not like I had that many jobs, but I've been working since I was 10.
Right.
And I ended up landing and going, my ex-boyfriend, who I had cheated on with the boyfriend I was with, picked me up from the airport and brought me back to my apartment. And I was like, I need help. I need rehab or something, because he brought me to my apartment, and I looked in the mirror, and I remember it so vividly. I bent over to get something, and you could see every one of my ribs. It was like disgusting. I was so skinny, and I was like, I did have that moment, like, who am I? I looked in the mirror, I'm like, what have I become? I just didn't.
Yeah.
It was that they call it like a spiritual awakening.
Weren't you like, I have no soul or something?
I just
like
remember
that?
looking, and my eyes were dead, and I was gone. And then it was Mother's Day, which is probably subconsciously, I'll let the therapists out there work that one out. Feel free to psychoanalyze me and send it in a comment.
Right.
So I was like, happy Mother's Day. I'm a heroin addict. And
so you told your mom?
Yeah, I had my ex-boyfriend drive me out to where they were living in the suburbs. And then I said, I need help. And they brought me to a mental institution because that's the experience that my stepdad was in and out of mental institutions, like my whole upbringing. So they had a lot of experience with it. And they were like, oh, we'll take you there, which was hell, because had they taken me to like an actual rehab, they would have probably tried to manage my detox, so that you don't like fry your brain, because you do. But I just detoxed cold turkey in a mental ward with a cutter.
Right.
My roommate.
For 3 days, right?
Yeah. And I was kicking. I mean, I don't remember much. I just remember being miserable and sick and like so miserable. And there was this lady, Fern was her name. And she was this old lady, and she was in the room next door. And she would be like, all day and all night, oh God, let me die. Oh God, let me die. Fuck. Over and over. And then she would have these horrific coughing fits where she'd be like, and you would think that she was going to die. You're like, is this the moment? And then it was like, she'd stop, and then it was like, oh God, let me die. I mean, and she was like the external manifestation of my detox. Right. I was like, fucking let me die.
What a horrible experience.
And then it's a mental ward, and those places are nuts. And if you aren't actually crazy and you're in a mental ward, I remember calling my ex-boyfriend. He brought me like McDonald's one day, came check on me after the 72-hour hold. Oh, well, part of it was because I ended up having to go to the ER because I was like apparently on death's door. Right. And they put me on this respirator because I had untreated bronchitis for months.
Right.
And I couldn't breathe. And
because you were smoking heroin, weren't you?
Yeah, and snorting it. And then I shot it and was like, I'm going to die. And then we ended up, when I was in LA, the night that I walked back to the hotel, I locked myself in the bathroom and did all of the blow that we had, or as much as I could. Jesus. And then I superficially took the razor to my wrist, but like not enough, but I was trying to get attention from my boyfriend. And I did want to die too, but not really.
Right.
It was like a cry for help cuts, but they were on my wrist. So then when I went into
the mental institution,
well, that's what I think part of the reason that they were like, we need to put her in the mental institution.
Right.
I don't know. Apparently I said all this stuff. I don't remember to this day.
So you were on a 72-hour hold and you're...
I don't think I was on a 72-hour hold. I think they just put me there. And after 72 hours, I was allowed to get visitors. And then I was like, get me the fuck out of here. I'm not crazy. And then they put me in this other rehab that was in a hospital, but it was a rehab.
Right.
For a week. And that was where I got sexually assaulted by one of the dudes who's in there. It's not funny, but it's just like...
It is a story of compounding issues.
Like one thing after another. At that point, I didn't even care.
Right.
You know, I was like, I was detoxing out of my mind. Had lost everything. Hadn't seen the sun because they don't let you outside. So you're just inside. And then after a week, they're like, well, your insurance is up. You're free to go. And I was like, there's no way.
Right.
I'm not, I'll start doing drugs again.
Right.
So I started calling around, and this is where it is like, I don't know what this inner, like, you know, there, but for the grace of God go I. I don't know what is inside of me that like pulls me back from the ledge. But I was discharged, and I called around, and I'll never forget this either. I didn't want to be with men because obviously,
right.
And I called this one halfway house, and it was state funded. So what they had told me to do essentially was go put myself on general assistance, which is welfare.
Uh-huh.
And I was 18. So I put myself on welfare. I took a bus, got into this place where everyone was offering me crack the minute I got off the bus. And I just put my blinders on, I barely remember it. I remember the bus ride and the crack being offered to me everywhere. And then getting on welfare at this weird office. And then it was somewhere in Minneapolis. And then took the bus back to my rehab. They discharged me, and this place accepted me. And it was like, I called, and this woman, Anita, answered. And she's like, I was like, hi, can you tell me what this is like? And she's like, you ever heard of boot camp? Just like that. And I was like, perfect. I knew I needed something.
Right.
I knew I needed my ass kicked. I just knew I needed structure, right. And I knew I couldn't go home. And so anything sounded better. I ended up getting discharged, and I never will forget this. I walked downstairs. I was waiting for my cab to take me to my halfway house. I was tempted so many times. And the guy that had been, I still remember his name too, had been in rehab with me, had got out, and he was like in this Cadillac waiting for me. And it was like the cab and this caddy. And he was already doing blow, and the caddy just like sitting on the side of the, you know, he like showed me what, like he lifted up the thing and showed me the console and showed me all the stuff in the middle. And I was like, it was such a clear decision though. I was like, this seems like death, and this seems like maybe life, at least a chance, but this seems like almost certain death. And so I went to my rehab, or to the halfway house, and I was there for 7 months.
Right.
And it was run by lesbians, and they had seen everything. And it was basically like Orange is the New Black, before Orange is the New Black. It wasn't jail, but it was one of those halfway houses because it was state funded and run, where it was like the last stop before jail.
Right.
So it was me and essentially 40 black women.
Right.
And I was by far the youngest.
Right.
Like by 20 years. And I was there for a while, but they really, I mean, those women, I might have drank and done drugs and done everything, but I never, ever touched heroin from that. I still celebrate that milestone.
Right, right.
Because I mean, it was a blessing and a curse. So the blessing is that I never touched heroin again, and that is a miracle because it's such a compelling drug. And even right now, if someone told me there was an asteroid headed for Earth, that is the first thought I would have is like, let's go cop some smack. But I mean, maybe not, but it would be the first thought. I don't know that I would act on it, but it would be the first thought.
Right, right.
It wouldn't be my best one, probably. I'd like to take a quick break to talk about one of our sponsors this week, Green Chef. Green Chef is a USDA certified organic company that makes eating well easy and affordable with plans to fit every kind of lifestyle. Green Chef lets you choose from a wide variety of easy to follow lifestyles with select organic ingredients. Meal plans include paleo, vegan, vegetarian, pescatarian, Mediterranean, heart smart, lean and clean, keto, gluten-free, and omnivore. There's something for everybody. Recipes are quick and easy with step-by-step instructions, chef tips, and photos to guide you along. Everything is hand-picked and delivered right to your door. You can switch up your meal plan whenever you're ready to try a new way to eat. Let Green Chef do the meal planning, grocery shopping, and most of the prep for you week after week. I love learning how to cook and cooking, and I hate grocery shopping. So this kind of situation where the food shows up and directions for new different meals is so appealing to me. And no matter what diet I might be trying here in LA, which is always something new, it really just suits whatever my lifestyle might be that month. This is what I love about something like Green Chef, is that it takes what you already are trying to do for your diet and then it tailors it to you. For $50 off your first box of Green Chef, go to greenchef.us/walkin, WALKIN. That's greenchef.us/walkin for $50 off your first box, which is a great deal.
So talk about the rehab a little bit. I mean,
they were great. I mean,
it was hardcore, right? You were in therapy, right? Group therapy.
Oh yeah, it was just every minute was scheduled, and you had group therapy, you had individual therapy, you had small group therapy, you had morning meetings, and it was
they didn't let you get away with any bullshit.
You had to make your bed every morning, like exactly the nice army way, and you had to. Everybody had dish duty, so it wasn't like it wasn't like a cushy Malibu resort. Like we did all the cleaning, we had chores on the weekends. It was nuts.
That's probably the best way to handle.
You had phone time.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like there's a freaking halfway house across the street, and there's literally an ambulance there every other day. These places now are just insane, and they're cushy, and you live in like a mansion, and they make your meals and all this stuff. It's nuts. I didn't have any of that, and it was the best thing ever, probably. And they did give me a lot of tools, like cluttered room, cluttered mind. That was the first time I ever heard that. Mm-hmm. I started going to meetings and was reluctant about it. My first meeting, I was still pretty fresh. I was probably 10 days in. Mm-hmm. So I was still like kind of rocking in my chair and scratching and kicking a bit. Detoxing still, I'm sure. Not as hardcore, but I had a bunch of pimps proposition me. They could just see right away.
Wow.
Like they're like, "Oh, honey, you look new." It was an NA meeting actually, which is a different vibe completely. They can be great. One of the things they say about NA is like it's people there to save their life, and AA is people pissed off that they can't drink. And I don't necessarily agree with that, but I always laugh at that distinction the NAs make.
So you made it through rehab. Did you decide to leave after 7 months? Did you think you were ready?
Basically, I mean, I had been there as long as they could pretty much let me be there. On the dole.
Weren't you like voted?
I was nominated president, yes.
Of your rehab.
Yes. And I only wanted it because you got out of dish duty, but then you had to make the chart for the dish duty, and it was a nightmare. I would have just rather washed all the pots had I known. But yeah, I was there so long, and you know, I have a journal from then, and I'll write a play about it someday. Yeah. I've always wanted to write a play about that experience. That's was so
where you learned how to play dominoes and proceeded to teach everyone else
in my life.
Yeah.
Oh God, we played so much like we would get put on lockdown because we were bad or we were acting out or fighting or whatever. And the only way you could get cigarettes was if you played dominoes and we'd all bet cigarettes. And I just sat down and acted like I knew how to play dominoes. And I'm sure they were like, okay, little white girl, sure, you know how to play dominoes. But I just sat and observed and kind of picked it up. And then I got hooked. And it was like, we had tournaments because we would be locked down for the entire, because it was a halfway house. So every 30 days that you're there, you get more privileges. Like you can walk to the store. You can, by the time I was there, I was bike riding to my 5 a.m. coffee shop job in the freaking freezing cold. I mean, it was all of that was so good because it did. Whenever later in life I thought about using heroin, kicking just hard, cold turkey with Fern and bike riding in this shitty bike in Minnesota freezing to a coffee shop job. Like I have such a vivid memory of sitting in the cafeteria, and it was when my siblings were out east with you guys and hanging out in the beach, and all my friends were on the lake partying. And I'm like, I remember looking around and just asking myself, how did I get here? How did I get here? And my ex was at the cushy like Hazelden because he's rich, and we got in trouble. I got put on mail restriction, interestingly enough.
What does that mean? Male as in men?
Yeah. Because they said that I had just as much of an addiction to men as I did drugs and alcohol. Also true. And it happened because I lied and said that my ex's counselor said it was okay for us to get together, and he lied and said the same about my counselor. And then I went to his rehab, and then we had sex, and we got caught having sex. And then the counselors talked to each other, and I came back, and my counselor was so pissed. She was amazing.
What does male restriction look like? What does that mean?
I could only talk to my brother or my dad.
Wow. No other men allowed in your life?
No, I couldn't leave the place either.
Wow.
And it was for weeks. So I was just a prisoner of this place. And the only male that was there was the maintenance guy. And he and I became really good friends, of course, because he was like the only male in a 20-foot vicinity. And he saved me truly in many ways, because he was a reform junkie, and he would just make me promise that I wouldn't leave over the weekend. And I had such a crush on him because he was the only male I was allowed to talk to that I would want to leave. And girls were leaving all the time. Women were leaving in groups. They'd like just leave. Like people who were doing well, they would all leave together. It was so traumatizing. These people you'd get to know.
So then what happened when you left rehab?
Ugh, it was a shit show.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that whole...
So then you had another whole shit show of an emotional thing happen for the next, year and a half?
Ugh, God, yeah.
But were you clean through that
No, I was sober probably a month out of the halfway house, but then all this other stuff started happening with my family, and I was really getting back. It wasn't that I was getting back on track. I just realized that I found the path I'm on now.
Right.
Which is that I wanted to be an artist and a writer and a creative, and it had never been something I knew was possible.
Right.
I thought I had to go to college and get a communications degree or go be in marketing or go have a real job or whatever. I didn't think that I could. I mean, I always wrote, and I wanted to be a writer when I was little, but it just didn't. I had lost that. I was lost. Yeah. I was so lost. So I started kind of rediscovering myself, and then
you started drinking and smoking weed again.
Right? Yeah. Okay. And I was like, I'll be fine if I do this, as long as I never knew that's what I was saying. Is it was a double-edged sword. Was that on the one hand, I never did heroin again. On the other hand, I said to myself, I'm 19. I'm not going to quit drinking. And as long as I never do heroin, I don't have a problem. Anyone would get addicted to heroin.
Right.
Mind you, I had done an inventory. I still have the inventory. When you do an inventory, it's like basically what we did, where you ask me about, but it's even more detailed. How many drinks did you have? When did you start drinking? When was the first time you got drunk? When was the first time you smoked weed? When was the first time you did hard drugs? How often were you doing hard drugs? You do this whole thing and write it down, and then you do all how it affects you emotionally, physically, your family, your everything. And at 19 years old, there was more than enough evidence that, looking at it now, that I'm like, yeah, you're an addict.
Right.
I should have quit forever then.
You just didn't. Yeah, you didn't. You were 19. You didn't want to never.
But
have
not
a
only
drink again.
that, the shit that was going on in my life was so freaking hardcore. There's no way I would have been able to handle it.
Right.
There's no way.
It's a miracle you didn't go back to heroin.
It's a miracle because everyone in my house. So I moved into. I met a bunch of young people at meetings and moved into a house with a bunch of young sober people in Minneapolis, and one by one, they all started relapsing and using heroin. Everyone in the house, everyone above me, somebody OD'd and died. It was just so, that time was just chaotic. And I had started going to film school in Minneapolis and taking dance classes and just getting back into the arts. And I was so excited to be acting again, and which is what I always wanted to do. I did it every single summer. I went to acting camp and I was the lead in my high school play when I was a senior, and I found my way. I was finding my way back, and then the rug got kind of pulled out from underneath me in a way that was nuts, and I moved to LA.
Right.
I just basically got in my car and moved out here, which
moved.
Yeah.
And that's when you wound up in the valley, right?
Yeah.
So you were only in LA for 8 months, something like that, or 6 months.
Yeah, I wasn't here long. I was doing tons of drugs again. Not heroin though, but I was doing playing dominoes because my neighbors play dominoes, which was awesome, every night until 4 or 5 in the morning with these D-list porn stars and this lawyer who also sold cocaine. And it was classic Valley.
And tell everyone, what were you doing for work?
Working at the bike shop?
Yeah.
Oh my God. What was I doing for work? I was an extra. I was in you will see me in the background of every single
Scream 2 in the car.
Felicity. I was an extra in Felicity. I was an extra in Buffy. I was an extra in Freaks and Geeks. I was an extra in all of those types of shows.
Right. In the traffic jam, you were sitting in a car and Scream 2 or something.
Yeah.
Whichever one the traffic jam is in.
Oh God, that was such a
or
nightmare shoot.
I've always looked for you when I've watched reruns of Buffy. I've always been it'd be hilarious if I spotted Bridget in the background.
Oh my gosh, I'm in the back. I'm in the background of every one of those shows.
You were working in a bike shop, but you never sold a bike.
Never. It was a motorcycle shop. A Suzuki motorcycle shop.
And why the hell were you working in
there? It was my roommate's stepdad's store or friend's store, something. I never sold a single bike. I was miserable. It was such a bad, dark time.
So then what happened? So then you wound up moving back to Minnesota, right?
Well, yep. I went back to Minnesota and back to the East Coast.
How old were you? You were in Minnesota for a few months, and then you moved back to LA, but you moved to
21. So I was in the Valley partying. Wasn't even 21 yet. I was going to Sunset. I was living that early 20, going to clubs and the LA 20, going to the whiskey and all of it.
Right.
And partying and just spinning around. And then I left because I was in the Valley and miserable and couldn't make money and didn't know what I wanted to do and felt lost. And I was trying to be an actress, but it was horrible and I didn't have any guidance or anything. And I was still so lost, my God. And then I went and I had all this family stuff that had happened that I wanted to resolve. So I went back to Minnesota for a minute, but then my family was moving to the East Coast because my younger sister had just found out she was pregnant.
Right.
And so she was moving back east, and then everybody kind of migrated back east. And then I was back east for a hot minute, and I was like, I'm out of here. And I came back to LA, but I decided to go live on the west side, and I ended up just only smoking weed. It was actually good. I started getting it together.
Okay, but wait, for anyone who's listened to the original story hour, that was when she was living in Santa Monica with the neighbor who thought that she was Bridget was spying on her for Martin
This is that
Scorsese.
time. Well, that was the end of this time.
Right.
So I found my way back, and it was I was an intern at Buddy Head, and I was
you were the Buddy
working
Head
with an
girl.
autistic kid, and that I fell into that, and I loved it, and I was really only smoking weed and drinking, and maybe doing some hard drugs here and there, but not.
you were really happy.
Yeah.
It was a really good time for you.
I was going to the farmer's market and I was pretty balanced and like making my way. And then Dagmar came along and I was in debt. And so I decided to go home and I put all my stuff in storage and never.
You decided to go home to make some money in the season, the waitressing season.
Which I did. Mm-hmm. I paid off my debt in 3 months. Mm-hmm. And I worked at a PR company writing all these stupid things. And worked at the governor's ball and all. And then and my dad said, like, don't get sucked in. And I did. And then I gave up on all my dreams and myself and was alcoholically drinking, got married. I mean, got a kidney infection. I think I mentioned that. I was alcoholically drinking. And doing tons of blow. Right. It was like the classic resort town life.
Waitress.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tons of blow. And then, I mean, that's when we spent a lot of time together.
Yeah.
I mean, we were waitressing together. Yeah. And then what happened? Then we got out.
Well, yeah. Then a lot of other stuff happened.
A lot of other shit happened. Oh, and
I left my husband.
Right. Started Phetasy. Took Phetasy on the road.
Yep. That's where that story hour picks up.
Right. And then I was finishing school. And then once I was done finishing school, I moved to Park City and you had other shit go down and came out to Park City with me. So then let's talk about when you got sober. So we were living in LA. You went sober for a year.
Yeah, I did I was heartbroken. Right. And I also that was the thing that I couldn't get him out of my life because every time I get stoned, I would feel all soft and mellow and like reach out. And I had to stop reaching out to this person and or drink. I would cry and be a disaster. Mm-hmm. So I also had kind of recreated my childhood and like all of my jobs around me. And there was a lot of wreckage. I mean, I lost my online world and my offline world collided.
Right.
And I was working at the school teaching yoga. But I do think, looking back, I see how smoking weed and drug addiction and drinking and delusions and I can see how I just was creating a lot of problems for myself and not aware of it. And so I was like, luckily, same thing happened though throughout all that time that I was married, I found yoga that was what kind of bounced me out of my marriage. But God forbid I get sober. I did everything in my power to not go back to AA. When I left AA in Minneapolis, because somebody OD'd, my friend who lived upstairs, and I blamed the program. Mm-hmm. I was like, F that, F this program, it doesn't work. I read all the books that were like anti-AA so that I could build a case and be like, AA is the problem. And it is not a good solution. And I never wanted to go back. And I wasn't just like, oh, AA works if it works, like great. And if it doesn't, I was like, fuck AA.
Yeah,
I was anti-AA.
Yeah, for a long time.
Which should have been signed then. Just signed there too. Uh-huh. So I got sober and was sober for I was sober for 90 days, just white knuckling it. When I was back here. And I was 30 years old, maybe. Mm-hmm. And I ended up mentioning that I felt like I needed friends and support in front of a woman who I didn't know was in AA. And she was like, meet me at 7 this Saturday. And it was a woman's meeting. Uh-huh. And something got through to me. I heard something. I think the woman's share was all about her mom and her stepdad, and her story was I heard my story, and I was cried the whole time, and then I kind of did it for a year, but I was really doing it to prove to myself that I could be sober for a year,
right?
Because in the book it says there's somewhere it says try and be sober for a year if you can, maybe you don't need this, and right. I was like, I'll do that, and I went 13 months and. I didn't really work the program and I didn't work the steps. I didn't have any desire. I kind of showed up and said told people what they needed to hear. Not that anyone was on my back. It was more just so I would
You knew how to talk the talk.
Yeah, it's a chameleon. Yeah. I just knew how to sound and because I'd been exposed to it before, I just knew how to sound like I was doing it.
Right.
and with no intention of staying. And then I ended up.
Then you went to Australia and were like, I'm going to drink in
right.
Australia.
Well, when I got sober, I was like, oh, I've never traveled. That was the only thing I ever wanted to do as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what happens when you get sober. Your life, if you're an addict, or in my case, I've found that when I get sober, life just like you get out of your own way.
Right.
And so I started realizing that I wanted to travel, and I went and left LA, and I was still so heartbroken, and went up and worked on a farm, saved a bunch of money, bought a one-way ticket to Australia. And before I went to Australia, so I was like, there's no way I'm going to be sober in Australia. That's like a blind person going to a museum. Why would I do that? And now I would love to do it because I hear they have amazing recovery. But then I went to Australia, and I was kind of on a bender there. And then New Zealand.
That's where you ended up on the ashram at one point, which you wrote about.
Yeah. That's where I ended up on the sex cult. Although I was sober, although I did end up getting wasted the last day that I was there, and then kicked out of the ashram. Not really kicked out. They were cool, but they were like, you gotta go.
And then you wound up traveling for a while.
Well, I traveled. Yeah, and I was drinking. I was drinking when I was touring around with Phetasy around America.
Oh yeah,
and then I was drinking in New Zealand, and then I was drinking when I was in Singapore, I was blacked out and like on so much Xanax and Dom Perignon that I could barely function because I met a guy, and then we started traveling.
Right. You went to
Egypt. They don't drink much in Egypt, so I wasn't drinking, and I had bad anxiety the whole time I was there. So that was like a detox. And then Europe, and I was like boozing my way through
Where'd
Europe.
you go in Europe?
London, Paris, Vienna, Prague, Berlin, Rome, and then we ended in Saint-Tropez. And Saint-Tropez was just a party.
Right.
And
like a freaking shit show.
Yeah. And then I came back, went to the farm, went back out to Sri Lanka, which was supposed to be for 2 weeks, and then go to India. And I was in Sri Lanka for 2 months, and I raged in Sri Lanka. Although I was burning the candle at both ends. I was volunteering and at orphanages and teaching yoga and staying up for 3 days straight and dancing, and it was like the most fun time of my life. But I'm lucky I'm not in locked up abroad.
Yeah, and it's very strange when I think about your stories, because when you were sober for the year, didn't you go to Burning Man and you were sober for that?
I did. I was, because it was so close to my year. And so the only reason somebody gifted me tickets to Burning Man right before I sublet my place.
Right.
And I was going to go travel for a year.
Right.
And I basically sublet my place to force myself to not be here. And I was like just going to Jack Kerouac around, I guess, with which I did. Yeah. And I got in my car. And 2 days before I left LA, my friend was like, you're the only person I know who could randomly pull this together in 2 days. But I got gifted tickets to Burning Man, and it was a rite of passage year. And I just made it happen. I was like, I can't say no to that. But I was sober. So when I think about it, I was really only in AA that year of experimental sobriety for 6 months, because I did 3 on my own, found it at like 90 days. And then the last 3 months I was on the farm. I wasn't going to meetings or anything. And that was hard too.
So then talk about your experience of...
But Burning Man sober is amazing.
Yeah. But talk about your experience of then what happened that you decided to get sober again.
What happened in that year?
So after your travels, after you came back from Sri Lanka.
India. Yep. And then I went back to the farm, and then, I came back from India, and then I was here, and then I had a rager of a summer in LA, and then I went out east and was waitressing, because I was in between.
Oh, right.
We were waiting for the restaurant I was working at was opening another restaurant. We were waiting for the permit. So I had a month, and our cousin needed somebody because she was managing a new restaurant, and it was the shoulder season. Right. It was September. And so I went out, and it was like instantaneously just back into, I was even having sex
old
with
habits.
the same guys it was unbelievable.
Old
it was like I was
patterns.
25 all over again.
Our hometown is like that too. You just get sucked back
Oh,
into
it was
life.
instantaneous. And I was showing up at barbecues wasted and calling ex-boyfriends and shaming them and for getting married. I mean,
the family's all there.
Yeah. And I did bad, shameful things then. And I was really lost again too. I didn't know. Well, and okay, so I mean, I guess I have to kind of include this. I hadn't talked to my mom in 6 years.
Right.
And I saw her that September and it brought up all this stuff. And then I came home and I was on the plane on the way back to California.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to die. I was like, I'm going to go cop heroin. I'm done. I just didn't want to live anymore. I felt completely lost. When I was in Sri Lanka, I had this friend and he's like, at some point you're going to have to decide whether you're going to like put your roots down in LA and make it happen in the entertainment industry or whatever respect, or are you going to go be what did I want to do? Like be a
teach yoga
English
on the beach in Sri Lanka.
Well, teaching English abroad where you can just go anywhere every 2 years. And that sounded compelling. And I thought maybe that's what I was going to do. And then I was on my way back to LA after being in the hometown and I landed and something, but there for the grace of God go I, something was like, yeah, but before you go downtown and cop heroin, why don't you go for a hike? Mm-hmm. And I was like, so much blow and drinking and toxic. I was just toxic. And I went hiking on this hike that I did the other day when I was sad. And by the time I got to the top of it, the endorphins or whatever, just my perception had shifted. And I was like, I need a meeting. And I reached out to my friend and this woman who was one of the mothers of one of the teenagers that I had been working with back in like 2010 when my life the first experimental sobriety at the end of that. And we went to it was Thursday night, like tonight. And we went to the big meeting and I heard a speaker. I don't remember what they said. I remember sitting in the chair and crying most of the time. And then at the time, my sponsor, she's now moved to Rome, but she was friends with the woman who brought me and we all went out to dinner afterwards. And she's just so loving and radiant. And she was 5 years older than me and had 5 years. Mm-hmm. So she got sober at my age and she was just, she was like, oh, I was exactly like you. And I couldn't believe it because she was so calm and present in her skin and just like radiated love and seemed so at peace. Right. And I was like, yeah, you're lying or you're on drugs or something. And then I decided to give it a try. It was like so accidental. I came home that night and smoked weed and I quit drinking like a few days before I quit smoking weed because I knew I just felt like such a piece of shit. But I wasn't intending on quitting drinking. I just knew I needed a break. And I went and then I smoked weed that night and the next day kind of threw everything away and just thought I'd give it a whirl and reluctantly went back. I say reluctantly because if I had just drank the Kool-Aid like right away, but I just was so resistant. There was a part of me, they say in the program, you have to concede to your innermost self that you are an alcoholic and just can't drink normally. Mm-hmm. And it took me years to do that. Yeah. It took me like 2 years and I was miserable for the first 2 years and tons of stuff happened. My friend died. I got cancer. My car got rear-ended. It was like every time I turned around in sobriety, something
so broke, depression, all of it.
Yeah. So depressed. And I think that's the weed. I really think that the depression I had when I got sober because I just quit everything at once was from I'd used weed every day as basically like Ritalin and Prozac.
Right.
And I wasn't one of those lazy stoners. I was like a super motivated psycho stoner.
You'd get stoned and like clean your house like a maniac.
Yeah. And then not remember where anything was. And
talk about that a little because you did tweet about it a little bit that I was reading it where you're like, it's like a glass ceiling of smoke.
Yeah, that was because like I said, I tried everything. I tried doing yoga. I was always trying to manage my addiction. Mm-hmm. So I was always pulling myself back from the brink when my ex-husband and I started doing too many drugs and I was waking up and I was like, okay, I got to dial it back and I'll become a yoga instructor. And I did a whole year or not a whole year, but I did do the marijuana maintenance where I quit drinking. I would do it periodically when I was living in, as we call it, the barn. It was this building in
our hometown.
In our hometown, where I just didn't drink and I only smoked weed and I felt great. Right. So I thought that I could do that. And when I quit drinking, I quit smoking weed because I knew that it's such a short distance between intoxications for me. So I knew that I probably could have gone for a while, but I knew that it would get nice and I'd be down at the beach and in Venice and smoke some weed, and then suddenly I'd be drinking a beer.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I'd be off, and I was like, and I guarantee I'd be doing lines at the townhouse by the end of the night.
Right.
That's how quickly it would escalate. Right. And always did. I did not need any more evidence. I had years. I mean, when you think about the fact that I was in rehab at 19 and that I didn't get sober until I was 35.
Right.
With 1 year where I took it off. It is a miracle that I'm alive.
Miracle. So many stories.
So many people aren't. And people who don't even drink or use, by the way. But so many, I mean, it's a miracle I made it back. I was thinking, I always stayed away from pills because they scared the crap out of me, because when I was in my rehab, they medicated everybody to the point that they were like drooling sometimes, and it scared me. So I was always petrified of pharmaceuticals. It was like one flew over the cuckoo's nest.
Right. Which is a blessing in disguise for you.
Huge. But I became, after 9/11, I went through this phase for like 3, maybe longer. It was a while where I was like deathly afraid of flying.
That's right.
And my sister gave me Xanax and she was like, just take half. It'll be perfect for your flight. And I'm like, I don't know. This seems like heroin without any of the pesky side effects.
Right.
It's basically like suppresses your instinct to feel fear and gives you a great buzz. And I got on the plane, took half of one, drank a Jack and Coke, felt amazing, got another drink, took the other half.
Yep.
She'd given me 2. And then as we were descending, popped the other Xanax and got another drink. And I was hammered. You remember, you were here, I think, when I drove home. You and Sarah were like, what the hell?
Oh, God.
You drove home like this? And by the way, I was standing on the curb at LAX, like out of my mind. And these guys in a car just drove up and they're like, you look lost. Where do you need to go? And I'm like, I need to go to my car, because my car had been parked in the lot.
Yeah.
And they drove me there. Which again is like,
once again,
a miracle. I just hopped in this car of these random people. I was like completely in and out of like blacking out, driving home. Mm-hmm. But I tell that story in meetings. Like, it took me one cross-country flight to start abusing that drug.
Right. So dangerous.
6-hour flight. I mean, if there's ever doubt in my mind that I am an addict, there's so much evidence that I cannot do anything in moderation when it makes me feel good and takes me out of my brain.
Yeah.
I'd like to take a quick break so we can talk about our sponsor, Third Love. Third Love knows there's a perfect bra for everyone, so right now they're offering my listeners 15% off your first order. Here are a few reasons why I love Third Love and why you will too. And I do love this bra. It has quickly become my favorite bra in the world. They have perfect fit. So using millions of real women's measurements, Third Love designs its bras with breast size and shape in mind for an impeccable fit and incredible feel. There are more sizes than most other brands. Third Love is the industry leader with 70 sizes, including its signature half cup sizes. Convenience. Skip the trip. Find your fit in 60 seconds with Third Love's online fit finder. Order and try on at home. No more awkward fitting room experiences. No more horrible fitting room lighting. This is key, ladies. I love this bra. Love it. I am smitten with it. It is the greatest bra. It's quickly become my favorite bra. Just getting it was so easy. Taking the little quiz online was fun. I've told all my friends about this bra. It's so comfortable. Usually at the end of the day, I'm dying to take my bra off, and it's so many women can relate to this. It's this feeling of exhaling. And with Third Love, I don't have that feeling. I don't feel the insane desire to get it off. And I also don't have the exhale that I normally feel when I take another bra off that probably doesn't fit me as well as this bra does. Go to thirdlove.com/walkin now to find your perfect fitting bra and get 15% off your first purchase. That's thirdlove.com/walkin for 15% off today.
So let's go back to the weed then, because I do feel like it's important that people understand your feeling about it, where how insidious it is.
So, okay, the reason this comes up is because in those 2 years, I was so depressed, and the
first 2 years you were sober.
The first 2 years I was sober, and my therapist and I were kind of monitoring it, like, is it time for me to get on meds? Because I'm pretty suicidal.
Right.
It's getting pretty dark. And I was like, F that. I'm not going on meds. I'll just start smoking weed again. Right. That was kind of my best thinking. But I didn't want to start smoking weed again because then I was worried I'd start drinking. So, and I'd quit weed. And it wasn't like I quit drinking and then was still smoking weed. I quit both. And I'm like, why would I start smoking again if I quit it? Which I haven't managed to do. And when I was in rehab, they said your drug of choice is marijuana. Mm-hmm. And I was like, marijuana is not a drug. And they're like, yeah, exactly. And that was when I was in that halfway house. They just saw how much I adored it and still do. I still think it's a great plant. I still think it's a great medicine. I still wish that if I didn't smoke right now, I would not be smoking first thing in the morning. It's just... Everyone's like, well, you can try in moderation. And when people say this, moderation is hell. It's too much managing. It's easier for me. You know, some people have issues with the abstinence part of 12-step programs.
Right.
And there are some people who can do moderation. Right. I cannot. And I, as you can see, have enough experience.
Right.
And managed to live long enough to see that I cannot. And I tried.
Right. And you're a cold turkey kind of person. That's just the way you
everything they say in the book when it's like, you'll try drinking booze. You'll try drinking alone. You'll drink with friends. You'll do yoga. I'll try and get therapy. Go to a freaking ashram. Have a shaman. Like whatever. I tried all of it. It did nothing worked. Mm-hmm. I have that gene. And so we kind of monitored it, and then something shifted. You know, I wasn't really working a great program either. Looking back, I worked a great program my first year, and then my second year it was like the classic, like everything. My life got bigger and better, and things started improving, and I stopped going to as many meetings and stopped paying attention to my spiritual condition and became essentially miserable and dry. Mm-hmm. And I was so dry. I was so miserable.
Can you explain that a little bit to people who might not know what dry is?
I don't know how to explain it. It's like the most horrifying thing to me when I got sober was realizing that it wasn't the booze. It's they say like, come for the drinking, stay for the thinking. Mm-hmm. And somebody at a meeting the other day said the ism at the end of alcoholism stands for I sabotage myself. Uh-huh. And it is this insidious self-sabotage, like restless, irritable discontent. That's what dry is. Mm-hmm. I know when I start judging the world and being like, meh and nah, and just picking fights and hating everyone, I'm like, oh, I need a meeting. It's usually been a couple of days. I start feeling squirrely. I start feeling discontent. I start wanting to crawl out of my skin. Dry is like the alcoholism. You know, there's so many things they say. It's like alcohol is a solution to whatever it is in your brain. They say it's a disease of perception. They say it's a disease of loneliness. There's a million different things that they call it, but whatever that perception is or that feeling is what I was using alcohol to medicate. And if I'm not using alcohol or something else, which is why so many people get addicted to porn or sex, or I always say when you get sober, it's like whack-a-mole. Right. It's just like, oh, and now I have a porn addiction, and now I took care of that, and now
new addictions crop up. What would you say to people what have you found in the program that that you would say to someone who was resisting it like you were?
The 12-step programs get such a bad rap now, and it's unfortunate because I see so much good. You know, like anything, there's bad, but they haven't figured out how to treat addiction. They just don't. There's too many things. You know, a lot of the time someone will get sober and then you'll realize that they're bipolar and they've been self-medicating. So they're dual diagnosis. A lot of the times you deal with some of the things from your past and maybe you weren't really an addict. You were just, and my friend says like AA and LA is filled with neurotics. They're like people who aren't even alcoholics. They're just neurotic people. So it gets a bad rap because of the God stuff, because people say, you know, a lot of courts order people to go there. And so they're predators. I would argue there are predators anywhere. There's predators at church. There are predators everywhere you go. But there are a lot of sick people in the rooms, obviously. And so it gets this bad rap. And now there's a lot of science saying that it doesn't work. And it's weird because I understand the desire to resist it because I was that person who read everything and built my case against it. And was like, it's fear-based and the God stuff and blah, blah, blah. But it's pretty simple. I mean, it keeps things really simple. And I'm never... Even recently, I'm heartbroken and I'm applying the steps to my heartbreak. I can take those steps and they're not complicated. It's like it gives you a program it's a system for dealing with really anything. And even like politics. If I find myself getting heated about politics, I'm like, I can't be in resentment. So I need to get out of this and admitting powerlessness over people, places, and things. And, you know, I like that there's a whole chapter in the book about we agnostics. Like, Bill addressed this atheism and agnosticism because he was an atheist. And so being able to have a God as it's a God as you understand them. People get turned off by it. And I understand that. I came in as a Catholic and I could not say the Lord's Prayer for the first 2 years. It just triggered my Catholic guilt and everything. And so I understand that, and it is a program that's based in Judeo-Christian
ethics.
Well, that it came, the history of it is that's where it was based out of.
Well, I will say that there's stuff that I've learned just from you, and it seems really valuable to me to have. You guys do a lot of work, a lot of work on yourself, a lot of self-reflection,
if you're doing the work,
a lot of taking responsibility for figuring out subconscious things that you've let lie or that have remained buried. And like, it's a lot of self-work that makes you more aware, and you can bring yourself out of resentment, or you can be like looking at your own stuff and your own knee-jerk subconscious reactions and being like, oh, this is this, and I need to do this. You have steps in place that help you live a healthier life, that it's almost like, well, geez, I wish I had that.
I feel bad for people, actually. I used to hate when people were like, I'm a grateful alcoholic, and I never understood it, but I do kind of, because I see people who aren't and they struggle and they'll get into a situation where they don't know how to. I have a community of people that I can bounce my brilliant or horrible ideas off of. I got dumped on Friday and was on the phone with my sponsor on Saturday morning working the steps. Like, okay, what is, I'm in resentment. I'm in pain. So how is I powerless? How can I turn it over? What is my part in the matter? Always. What is my part? Even if my part is just choosing to be in this situation and looking at my character defects and assets and being able to make amends when I need to. And I was talking to my sponsor today, it never ceases to amaze me how after 5 years now, they're like little antibodies. And they say this in the program, like, you just create smart feet. And it took me, I think, like 2 years, between years 2 and 3, I really surrendered and turned. I still have my will all the time, but surrendered to the idea that there was something in that program that worked for people. And it was working for me because I could see my life getting better. I had tangible evidence. I was suddenly writing. I had been trying to be a writer for 20 years and I was getting paid to write, and dreams were coming true. So I had this tangible evidence that things were getting better not just like the bells and whistles, but internally I started feeling comfortable in my skin. My anxiety completely went away. Hypochondria gone. Like these things that I had suffered from, and you've
struggled
seen me
for years.
Oh, debilitating anxiety.
Yeah.
I mean,
and
fetal
hypochondria.
position
Yeah.
and hypochondria just gone. It was like so many things, and the gifts of sobriety in terms of the relationships I have with my family getting better, the relationship I have with myself, that I'm a better member of society. And the thing I love the most about the program is just the emphasis on being of service. And these people will show up. They show up for you when you break a leg and need people to bring a meeting and you can't get to one. I've gone and brought meetings to people when they were dying. I've brought meetings to women who just had babies. I've gone to jails. I've gone to institutions. I've spoken at rehabs. I'm given so many opportunities to get out in the community and give back. And there are so many people in the program who are doing that stuff.
Right.
So I don't see when people kind of crap on it, I'm like, okay, even if it doesn't work for everybody and it's not a perfect solution, why crap on it for the people who do?
Right. It is something that works and helps a lot of people.
Yeah. It works for a lot of people. And it's nice to notice how those so smart feet is like go to a meeting when you don't want to go so that when you need one, you'll go. You just create those habits. It's all habit. It's just all creating habits. And I was shocked at how quickly all of that kicked in this past weekend when I was heartbroken. It was like instant. I was like, you take a bath, have a good night in. Call your sponsor, reach out, share it. I went to a meeting. I shared at a meeting. Everybody laughed because
you went for a hike.
I went for that hike that got me sober and sat on the top of the rock and journaled and felt my feelings. I mean, that's a miracle. My very first sponsor, she said to me, all of sobriety is getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. Because a lot of the time, and I've experienced this even with the depression when I was early sober, my sponsor used to say, maybe you just need to be depressed, Bridge. Like maybe this is just part of it and you have to stop judging it and just let it be and maybe it'll lift someday. And that was the experience that I had. It was not necessarily anything I did. It just was working. Maybe it was my brain rewiring after 20 freaking years of smoking weed.
Right.
So,
and you had a lot of shit you needed to work through.
And still, I mean, they say that it's a whole idea that it's this peeling of the onion that you kind of, and I know people with 26 years of sobriety who suddenly get melancholy or depressed and you don't stop being human. I really doubled down. Like I did 90 and 90 at the beginning of year 4 because I felt myself kind of drifting between 3 and 4 and it changed my life again.
Yeah. That was great for you.
It changed. I'm doing it again with a group of women now who are doing it because every time I do it changes my life. And
90 is 90 meetings in 90 days.
I don't know. It's just I used to hate when people said everything in my life should be labeled property of AA and everything in my fucking life should be labeled property of AA. Everything I have, everything.
And we've talked about that. We have a lot of ambitions and goals and desires, but the first and foremost thing in your life is sobriety. That is the foundation upon which you build everything.
Yep. Love and service, but sobriety, it is. I lose everything. I know that. And it's funny because when I get into results and out of being of service, being in the program, because I was investing a lot of time in this person who my therapist said it was a drink on 2 legs, which was very interesting. And it is interesting how you can start to put your look for that. I'm such an alcoholic. It's like, I just want something to make me feel different or better or good, and
to change
whether that's
your reality.
a thing. And that's what I was going to say about getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. A lot of the times I'll want the program to work like a drug. It's like, well, I meditated and I called 4 alcoholics and I went to a meeting and I don't feel better. What the F? And it's not going to work like a drug. That sometimes I just have to sit with being uncomfortable.
Right.
And that is not easy for someone like me who always reached for something to change the way I felt forever.
Right.
So readjusting that whole frame of like that entire worldview that I couldn't just make. And now even, the gym helps because I do have to sweat every day, or it shifts my perspective, but at least it's in a positive direction. If I don't go after 2 or 3 days, I start feeling like, what's wrong with me?
Right.
And it is a miracle. I mean, I never really thought I'd be in the program again. I still think it's funny sometimes when I go. I'm like, really? I'm back here after 20 years?
And I still remember you being like, I wonder what it would be like to be like 5 years sober. Wouldn't that be cool?
Oh, it
to
seems
have
like
5
science
years
fiction
under my belt.
Yeah, it's like, and it goes so fast actually. And at first, when you first get sober, God, like early sobriety is so hard because the days are so long. You're like, these days, were they always this long? Or was I just drunk for half of them? And now they're all filled. Now it's like they go fast. And I do have so much respect for whoever invented this, Bill and Bob and the founders of this program. Say what you will about all the other treatments, and there are so many other alternatives. And I tell people, I'm like, it's not for everyone.
Right.
It's just not. I think with recovery, it's finding what works for you and trying things. And, some people, if you're just a hardcore like heroin addict and the thing that works for you is smoking weed and you're not using heroin anymore, I'm not going to begrudge somebody that marijuana maintenance program if they're not using heroin or meth anymore.
Right.
I don't have a puritanical view about it. I feel like whatever works for people, and I know a lot of people who are like, oh, just that, like the time that you have. For me, I need the counting of days that accumulate because it gives me space between that last drink that I don't want to sacrifice.
Right. What would you say? Because I know you sound really good right now, and I know that you are in a really good place, but there are days certainly when you're like tempted, or you're like, I almost
we have
drank.
them on Patreon.
Yeah.
I mean, that thing that I think it's on Patreon, where I was in like a dark place 2 months ago and I wanted to drink. I wanted to drink on the 4th of July, just out of the blue.
And I remember talking to you on the phone when I was home and you were like, I almost drank. And it's like, what do you say to people who have that, or how do you get through that day?
My first thought is always my worst one. So I just don't act on it. And I've created smart feet. Doing 90 and 90 is a great way to create smart feet because you don't want to go to a meeting and you go. Mm-hmm. And for me in sobriety, everything was opposite day. Mm-hmm. So they say contrary action, but for me, it was like everything I want to do, I probably shouldn't do. Like go to Hawaii with 30 days alone. And everything I don't want to do, I need to do. Like go to those meetings or speak on that panel or whatever. Just say yes to all the things. And working the steps really helped, like actually putting pen to paper. There's magic in that. There's magic in that with goals. There's magic in putting pen to paper in anything, whether you're or not you're an addict. I would say write your stuff down and be amazed at how it unfolds. On those days that you're squirrely, I mean, I've definitely been there where it's been 1 minute at a time. Yeah, I've reached out to alcoholics. On Christmas Day, I called my sponsor because I walked a mile to go to a meeting, was feeling squirrely, and the meeting was closed because it was Christmas and the pub was right down the street. And my first thought was, I could go to the pub. And it's just in your brain.
Yeah.
And it looked fun. Everybody was outside. It was nice. And that was my first thought. And I was like, terrified by it, but luckily I had a sponsee who was in crisis, and then I called my sponsor and she talked me down off the ledge. And smoking weed, the fact that weed is legal and everywhere, it makes me want to
smell. Yeah.
I mean, I got sober before Uber and legal weed and like all the cool things that make all this shit so easy.
So much easier to manage.
But maybe that's a good thing because I'd probably be like a shit show if that was the case now. And somebody was sharing at a meeting about the dispensaries opening and how it's like torture. But he said there was a meeting right next to one that's open. And he's like, there were like 5 people at 7 a.m. waiting outside to get in. And he just said, I'm just so glad that I'm going to a meeting and I'm not doing that I'm not a slave to that. And I was a slave to, I do feel free. I was a slave to my addictions, all of them. various forms of them, and weed and drinking in particular, and probably men. It's a constant battle. I mean, it's not something that I love what's the saying that I love? You can't stay clean on yesterday's shower, which I love. It's a daily, I mean, and they say, again, these are all these like platitudes that I freaking used to hate, but they're very true. It's like a daily reprieve.
Yep.
And I have a great sponsor who's very much concerned about my spiritual condition. She doesn't tell me whether to do something or not do something. It's like, just don't drink or use no matter what. You're still going to be human, and you're still going to make mistakes and make bad decisions. And as long as you stay sober, you'll learn from them. And how does it affect your spiritual condition? Mm-hmm. And I was always a hippie, yogi, like the God stuff, hippie, universe, that stuff was never hard for me. It's not hard for me to look at the sun setting or rising, or the moon, or an eclipse, or know that and this is what I say to my sponsees, are so resistant, or my heart. I'm like, do you make your heart beat? When they're like, I don't know anything's bigger than me. I'm like, well, do you make your heart beat? And do you think about it and make your heart beat? And they're like, no. I'm like, okay, that's enough. You just have to know you're not in charge. Like there's something else going on. And when I had such a hard time in the beginning, I had dogs as my higher power, because it was just, I do feel like it's God backwards, and they're just everywhere. So whenever I felt like I needed a God shot, I would just, suddenly a dog would appear. They're everywhere in LA, and that worked for me. So a lot of people use the group. I would say to people who are resistant to that God stuff, if you can just substitute something, anything, whether it's a tangible thing like the people in AA, or something intangible like the universe, or something like a dog,
right?
Then okay, it just can't be you. It just needs to be something bigger than you, something other than you. Mm-hmm. Because the minute I know when I'm in trouble. There's certain signposts for me that when I know I'm in trouble. Like nihilism is a bad one. When I start saying I got this, I'm in trouble. When I start saying none of this matters, I'm in trouble. There are just signposts when I'm taking my will back. When I'm saying, and I still have a hard time with like surrendering my will to a power. It's still, it unfolds in different ways. Mm-hmm. Because I'm so strong-willed, and I want what I want. But when I get out of that space of love and service and just being, I start seeing recently in the place that I've been, where I'm paying too much attention to the results instead of the work. And I'm getting too boggled down in the trolls and what they're saying, and I'm suddenly concerned what other people are saying, and it's like, who gives a shit? Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. It's none of my business what anyone thinks of me, really, and I really should only be concerned about my connection to something bigger than me and how I can be of service and connect to people, and I forget that. And then even, it's so toxic, and Twitter and online and the discourse and the politics and everything right now. It's easy to get bogged down in all of that and lose sight of, once I'm outside of a meeting, to like take they say practice these principles in all our affairs. So even just the tweet that inspired this whole podcast, it was like so inspiring in this bright light and this sea of just, toxic snark and shit. Uh-huh. And I needed it. I needed to be inspired and reminded and remember that when my primary purpose is to stay sober and to help another alcoholic achieve sobriety. That is my primary purpose. Everything else, writing books, doing videos, like anything, being a mom, it doesn't matter. All of that stuff comes secondary. And when I remember that that is my primary purpose, all the other things unfold how they should.
Right.
But when I'm like trying to manage all the other things, I start getting crazy. And when I step outside of that very small circle of this is the moment right now and how can I be of service and, focus on the work, then it gets pretty ugly pretty fast for me.
Yeah.
And I'm constantly reminded by things like heartbreak that put me back in the program, because it's like pain is the touchstone of our, it just puts you back in that space more than when you're like killing it or doing well.
Right.
So I'm just constantly reminded that it's accessible to me anytime. And it's free. That's the thing that is mind-boggling to me. There's 2,000 meetings a week in LA, and they're free. Like, what, $1? I mean, it's crazy to me that you can just go sit down and hear someone tell their story, and maybe you'll relate to it and be like,
find help.
Yeah.
It's a way to seek help.
It's crazy.
Well, what do you want to leave this podcast with? Where do you want to end it?
I don't know. I'm sure people have sometimes I'd like to take people through how I work the steps, but that's almost like a completely separate thing. And I don't have any answers. This is just my story. I guess if you have questions, reach out to, send them to us. We really should get
a podcast email. You think? All right. We'll put that on the list.
Well,
walk-ins welcome question
at Gmail, or just walk-ins welcome at Gmail.
Yeah.
Maybe that's available. We'll see.
We'll check that out.
If it is available and we do it tonight or before next week, email us at walkinswelcome@gmail.com or something.
And if not, we'll change the email address in the description of the podcast.
Yeah. I don't know. If you have any questions, just email me. And if you're struggling or know somebody who's struggling, or maybe wondering if they should get sober or anything, maybe send them this podcast.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I will say, like, I've known you forever, and I've known Party Bridget, and I've known Sober Bridget. And
Party Bridget was pretty fun though.
Yeah, but you're fun no matter what. Like, you never stopped being fun after you got sober. It wasn't like all of a sudden you joined a convent or something.
Yes.
But it is inspiring. It's inspiring to see and to watch you having gone through this process. And
I mean, it's a crazy story.
It's a crazy story.
It's a crazy story when you think of the fact that really 3 years ago I was waitressing,
mm-hmm.
and then I started writing for Playboy, and then was on Ben Shapiro's show on Fox,
right,
as an independent, which is
we're going to cover that in another story hour, how you got from one thing to the next.
But that is sobriety,
right? And
that is also talk about just letting things unfold that I never would have ever in a million years. If you told me when I got sober that was going to be that I'd be on Ben Shapiro's show as an independent on Fox News, I would have been like, give me more of whatever drugs you have, because you're a crazy person, clearly.
But thank you for sharing your story. I think it helps. I think it helps people just hearing what other people go through and what their journey has been. And
a lot of people ask, like, it's a long story because it took so many years to get in sober.
Yeah.
And a lot of people ask me, so now I can just direct them to this podcast.
Be like, do you want the
story? Do you have an hour and a half?
Do you have 2 hours?
Yeah, do you have 2 hours? Well, I don't have 2 hours to tell you. And that's, like, by the way, just the
overview.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Bridget.
Thank you, Mag.
Proud of you. Love you.
I love you too. Thank you for being so supportive.
My pleasure.
Maggie's great because she knows that sometimes I care about, sometimes 90% of the time I'm fine being around booze, but if I'm in a squirrely place, I don't want to be around it. And Maggie's so great about always being like, do you care if I bring beer over to watch a game, or do you care if I'm drinking? And that's, if you have someone who's sober, it's especially like an early sobriety, it's a nice thing to be aware of.
Yeah, I try.
But then again, we have like a raging alcoholic family, so when we go home, it's just
a free for all.
Yeah. It's just sober Bridget and everyone else.
Story time for another day.
Yep. We'll have to write that one down.
Yeah.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
This episode of Walk-Ins Welcome has been brought to you by Green Chef. Green Chef is a USDA certified organic company that makes eating well easy and affordable, with plans to fit every kind of lifestyle. For $50 off your first box of Green Chef, go to greenchef.us/walk-in. And we're also grateful for Third Love. Third Love knows there's a perfect bra for everyone. So right now they're offering my listeners 15% off your first order. That's thirdlove.com/walk-in for 15% off today. Tune in next week for another riveting episode that will change your life, help you get out of your own way, and solve all the world's problems. I want to thank Ricochet, my co-producer and cousin Maggie, and all of you out there listening. This has been Walk-Ins Welcome with Bridget Phetasy. I'm Bridget Phetasy, and you're welcome. It's the dumbest line.